was speaking to the fact, apologies for that. Before I got disconnected, I was speaking to the fact that the electric utilities are the custodians of the power grids that deliver electricity from where it is being produced, and of course to us in our respective demand centers, whether it be in our homes or our offices or wherever it is that we utilize energy services produced from electricity. And so that is significantly something that we have to understand the implications of in respect to how energy is produced, delivered, and utilized. As it regards the energy policy and the strategy for CARICOM, one of the things I would like to point out is that much of the policy speaks to the electricity system. In fact, even with respect to the Sustainable Energy Roadmap and Strategy, a significant part of the roadmap, including the targets that were approved by ministers in 2013 in that meeting to which I referenced, speak to the integration of renewable energy sources into the electricity system. So in fact, a lot of what we speak about when we talk about renewable energy and renewable energy integration has to do with how it is that we will integrate renewable sources of power into the electricity system. So taking wind, options that we have available in the different locales where it exists as a regime. The Caribbean, of course, is blessed with solar all over. Taking solar options where the land and the space provide the opportunity for us to put the technologies that can convert the solar energy into electricity and feed it into our grid is something that, of course, is also important. Hydro resources, there are bioenergy resources, many resources, renewable energy resources that are available, and being able to tap those resources through conversion technologies and feed them into our grids so that we can supply our demand center is a critical part of the CARICOM energy policy and the Sustainable Energy Roadmap and Strategy for CARICOM. In fact, when the ministers met, they approved targets that says that by 2022, CARICOM as a region aggregatedly should be producing around 28% of its electricity from renewable energy sources, and that by 2027, 47% of the electricity that we are producing should be coming from renewable energy sources. Naturally, countries have their own individual targets, some as high as 100%, but countries have been working systematically to integrate renewable energy into their electricity system. And so today, we are going to be speaking to a number of utility operators to understand the systems that they are running in their respective countries, to understand how much they have been working to integrate renewable energy options and sources into their systems, to understand what have been the implications, both from a performance standpoint and from a cost standpoint in respect to the system, because this is important. That we want to have electricity systems, or energy systems, but more particularly electricity systems that are stable, reliable, that are secure, that are cost-effective or affordable, if you want to call it that, whichever one you prefer to call it, and is able to, of course, be resilient to the various external shocks that our system will face, from the slower climate shocks like, temperature increases, to the more extreme climate-related shocks like extreme weather events and disasters like hurricanes and storms, to, of course, some of the more demand-driven shocks, such as we saw with the demand reductions due to epidemiologies such as COVID-19, and sometimes economic shocks that may come externally and cause some of our industries to either slow down or change their pattern of usage. Our systems have to be able to adjust accordingly, because if they are not sufficiently capable of adjusting, naturally, it will not be able to allow us to be able to provide the kind of reliability, the kind of stability, the kind of cost effectiveness and affordability features that we require the system to give us. So this is very important for us to understand. At the end of the day, we have to ensure that as consumers are us on the other side of the demand side of the fence, are those businesses and citizens who are depending on the electricity sector as a means of being able to produce economic good and economic activities and economic value. or to advance their social situation through the different social services, from healthcare to education, you name it. That all of those things, even in many instances, environmental issues, that the electricity system is capable of supporting that. In fact, critically, one of the things which will emerge in today's conversation, which is also going to be an interesting event coming up on Friday, is the integration, the convergence, if you want to call it, between the electricity sector and the transport sector, as much of the transport sector is being electrified through electric vehicle technologies. And you would have heard, some of you, the news this morning coming out of number 10 Downing Street in the UK, where the Prime Minister has announced that by 2030, all internal combustion engine vehicles, gasoline and diesel, will no longer operate in the UK. There will be a phasing out of internal combustion engines in the UK, a bold move. And naturally, as takers of vehicle technologies in general, the Caribbean will end up in a situation, if we are not careful, where we are unable to find the vehicles that we are used to if we do not plot and plan our path towards the integration of electric vehicles. So even as we talk about the electricity sector, these days it's not like before, where we had to treat the transport sector and the electricity sector as two separate animals. Nowadays, it's one holistic pathway that will integrate the use of renewable energy and energy efficiency across the entire value chain of our societies and our sectors, including transport. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a very exciting conversation with three utility managers representing, if you want to call it, a wide cross-section of groups in terms of diversity. We have from Belize, Ms. Sheena Simpson, who is the Manager of System Planning and Engineering at the Belize Electricity Limited, BEL, we call it. And she is going to speak a lot about Belize's role through the utility in managing some, of the renewable energy sources, and of course the system as a whole in respect to its arrangement. Belize, in fact, is one of those countries that have been lauded for the significant amount of renewable energy that's integrated within its electricity grid. Belize has a significant amount of hydro resources and some amount of bio energy resources through bagasse that is integrated very deeply into its grid. Belize is, in fact, one of those countries that on a good day, on a very good day, Belize could produce up to 90% of its electricity from renewable resources on a good day. And I say on a good day because these resources are seasonal, as you would imagine, and the days are not always good. And of course, this is linked to demand, and they will also speak about some of those demand patterns and the balancing of demand with supply as part of the grid service operation. But Sheena, has a lot of expertise in power system planning, and then of course the development of network designs and standards for grid system modeling, and has been doing quite a bit of work in that regard in BEL. And she holds a bachelor's degree in electrical and computing engineering from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, and is currently pursuing a master's degree in electric power engineering from Washington Washington State University. And she has served within the Association of the Professional Engineers in Belize as one of the counselors in that body. And Sheena is, of course, before she became systems planning engineer, she was the manager for distribution services. So she understands a lot about the distribution side in as much as she understands the general system planning and engineering side. So Sheena will speak about the experiences of Belize in that regard, recognizing, as I mentioned, that Belize actually accounts for a significant proportion of the renewable energy integrated into CARICOM. CARICOM as a whole has a little over 600 megawatts of renewable energy capacity aggregated across the region. And of that 600 megawatts, it is so a significant amount of that lies in Belize in the hydro potential that is there, and some amount of the cogen potential. And Sheena will walk us through some of that in that regard. As a matter of fact, 67% of the renewable energy potential in CARICOM, up to around 400 megawatts of the renewable potential in CARICOM, comes from hydro. And so Belize's role in utilizing hydro is an interesting one, because it helps to show us how it is that hydro can form part of our systems where those exist as resources, because not all countries have hydro resources, only a limited number. And so that is interesting and important. Belize also has the enviable reputation of being interconnected to the Mexico grid, and she will also speak about that. Belize also have submarine interconnection. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there's one country that has everything that you could look at in one shell, it's Belize. They have interconnection overland to Mexico. They have submarine interconnection between the mainland and the Keys. They have solar PVs, those small amounts, which is a variable renewable energy, which is much of what we'll talk about when we get down to Jamaica. They have hydro, they have biomass. In the case of Jamaica, ladies and gentlemen, there will be Linkoy Small. Linkoy is a power system engineer at Jamaica Public Service Company, the utility there, and he serves as the Director of Systems Operation, and he has been in this role since December 2017. And in this regard, he is responsible for daily and annual operations and the optimization of generation, transmission, and distribution systems on the power grid is his remit. So Linkoy is perfectly pleased to tell us about the Jamaica system. Interestingly, within the context of the Jamaica system, Jamaica has probably the highest, within the CARICOM region, the highest penetration of variable renewable energy sources on the grid. Jamaica has a significant amount of solar and wind on the grid, and Linkoy will walk us through that. So I'm not going to get into those details here. But if there is ever a model on how it is to integrate variable sources of renewable energy into your grid, Jamaica provides a good opportunity for us to understand that. And Jamaica has been able to integrate those resources with the assistance of battery and other types of storage, which recently were also integrated too. And Jamaica has now been bringing a significant amount of natural gas integration online. And so the mix of natural gas with battery storage and flywheel storage, and of course, wind and solar and small amounts of hydro with its thermal oil-fired plants, is something that is very interesting to understand, to see how Jamaica has moved from a mostly liquid fuel dependence to one that is diversified with variable renewables, and then of course backed up by the battery storage systems and the natural gas generators that allows it to have greater flexibility in how it manages and follows the load to compensate for some of those variabilities. And we will talk to a large extent when we speak to Lincoln about how those variabilities have been affecting system performance, both in terms of the engineering performance of the system as well as the cost performance of the system. Included in that too, we will speak about some of the demand fluctuations and the demand issues, how those changing demand circumstances, whether it's due to tourism, whether it's due to COVID-19, whatever it is, could sometimes affect the efficiency and cost effectiveness of your system. And last but not least, we will speak with Jonathan Kelly. Jonathan Kelly is from, and sorry, before I go on, Linkoy has his bachelor's degree from University of Technology in Jamaica in electrical power engineering. And he has been, he has completed this since 1997. So Linkoy has been in and around for a long time. Lastly, Jonathan Kelly will be speaking about St. Kitts in particular. St. Kitts and Nevis is the country, St. Kitts being the island that he is responsible for. St. Kitts is, of course, the island that is operated by the electric utility, St. Kitts Electricity Services, what is called SKELEC. Jonathan is the engineering manager for SKELEC and has been in that role since April 2020. And he's doing a lot of work looking at diverse engineering options for integrating renewable energy in that country. There is quite a lot of renewable energy which is intended to be integrated in the SKELEC system. There is already some solar PV in the system as we speak, small amounts. I think it's about 0.5 megawatt. Jonathan will correct me if there is more since, but I know they had about 0.5 megawatt up to 1 point, and they were looking at more. But what we know is that there is going to be, based on current discussion, quite a bit of new solar PV, and the approach that St. Kitts has taken is one where they're looking at, putting quite a bit of the onus on the IPP, the independent power producer, to put in the storage and the different types of mechanisms that is going to compensate for the variabilities. What they're asking is that the IPP puts in the systems in such a way that they are able to provide the power almost in a dispatchable way. And it's something that it would be interesting to hear how it is that St. Kitts is intending to approach this. Interestingly, in St. Kitts too, there has been a lot of discussions about interconnection, submarine interconnection between St. Kitts and Nevis, and it would be interesting to hear whether or not this is still a contemplation, understanding especially that Belize has made significant advances in that. We, should be sharing lessons to see whether this is something to be looked at. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not go any further. Without further ado, I will go to the question of to the colleagues and have them present their system models to you. I will start with Sheena from Belize. I'll go in alphabetical order so nobody is saying that I am picking on anyone in particular. So we'll start with Belize, go to Jamaica, and then to St. Kitts. And I will ask each of the three colleagues who are here with us today to provide us with an overview on their system and tell us with what have been some of the major, if you want to call it, operational features, challenges and opportunities naturally of those systems, especially in regards to the integration of renewable energy. So I will start with Sheena Simpson of Belize, and I will turn over to Sheena at this point in time. So thank you very much for listening to me go through that long preamble, but it was necessary for me to set the context in that way, in my opinion. And I noted one of the colleagues in the chat room has already stated that, asked the question as to whether the aggregated numbers I spoke about is one that is really for the English-speaking Caribbean. The numbers I spoke to are for CARICOM. Whether English-speaking or not, member states of CARICOM are whom I referred to when I spoke about those aggregated numbers of 600 megawatts, which includes Suriname, which is actually a Dutch-speaking Caribbean country. But Suriname, in fact, accounts for the lion's share of the renewable energy due to the large amount of hydro it has in its system within CARICOM. But that's a conversation that we can have during the question and answer session. So Sheena, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Gardner. It's a pleasure to be here. So share this presentation with you all and give you all an overview of our electric system. The presentation for me, please. My presentation, it looks like I don't have access.
There's no audio on the presentation.
Hi, can you please project the presentation again? I may be having some internet issues at this time, so I've disabled the video.
And Sheena, tell you what I'll do. It seems like that you're having some technical issues. I'll allow you and Nadia to work out the technical stuff in the background, and we'll go over to Linkai and come back and circle back to you. Let's do that. Because I think you might be having some bandwidth issues. So I'll have Nadia troubleshoot with you in the back end, and we'll circle back to you. So let me just go over to Linkai in the interest of time, and then we'll circle back to you, if you don't mind. Thanks. Linkai, I'm going to ask you to jump in and speak about the Jamaica situation before Sheena comes in. Sorry for advancing your slot, but thanks a lot.
No problem. As a system operator, you have to be ready for anything, you know. So that's all right. Hopefully Sheena gets her bandwidth issue sorted out soon. All right, Neda, allow me to share my screen, please.
Go ahead.
All right, so we're good. Everybody's following. All right, so good morning, everybody across the region, and for those sitting outside the region. We're going to go quickly into a glimpse of the Jamaican power system, just to tell you about our experience with the integration of renewable energy. Right. So, Devon, thank you for the introduction, and thank you, for hosting us on Belize, St. Kitts, and Jamaica. You see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
And stop me if I'm boring you. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Jamaican network. So GPS, which is the vertically integrated utility company, in charge of providing the electricity to Jamaica. We're sole distributors of electricity in Jamaica in regards to the transmission distribution system, where the generation system is concerned. We have both utility JPS-owned units and IPPs. JPS is 80% owned by the Japanese company, between the Japanese company Marubeni and Korea East-West Power, right? And the other 20% is owned by the government of Jamaica, as well as a few minority shareholders. So let's talk about the Jamaican system, right? And in terms of the power generation. So JPS as an entity, right, owns almost 406 megawatts of installed capacity. And that capacity is made up of thermal steam turbines, diesel engines. These are slow speed diesel engines, combustion turbines, right, that are running on ADO, combined cycle plant that is running on natural gas. And that plant we recently converted in 2016 from running on ADO to natural gas. So it's dual fuel prepared, as well as, just like our friends in Belize, we operate about 29 megawatts of renewable generation with 3 megawatts of wind. And on the IPP side, we have almost 250 megawatts of power coming from medium speed and slow speed diesel engines are running on LFO. And as recently as end of 2019 and the start of 2020, right, we commissioned into service a 194 megawatt LNG fired combined cycle plant, right, which is now one of our baseload plants in our system, placed in some of our age-old steam turbine units, and a cogeneration set of single cycle GTs running on LNG that assist us in electricity production for the grid and provide steam for the bauxite sector, right? We also have 157 megawatts of VREs from the IPPs, 101 of which is wind, and 57 megawatts of solar, most recent of which was commissioned in July of 2019, and that is the 8 Rivers facility located on the west of the country. So our installed capacity in Jamaica is about 1,100 megawatts, right? 406 for JPS, 693 worth of IPPs. And our peak demand, and I know everybody's not going to like this number for the peak demand, is 666.7 megawatts. Let me knock on my desk, which was, we had the experience that in 2017 during a heat wave and a drought cycle, right? We provide electricity to more than 655,000 customers, and Jamaica's population hovering in somewhere about 2.7 million thereabout. Our customer categories are residential, small and large scale, commercial, as well as industrial customers. And our T&D system has a transmission network operating at 2 voltages, one at 69 and one at 138,000 volts, almost 1,200 kilometers of transmission line there. And on our distribution network, right, where this is what leaves from our substation and goes out to our customers, we have voltages ranging from 12 kV out to 24 kV, and which constitutes almost 11,000 kilometers of primary distribution line. So let's talk about the Jamaican story a little bit in terms of renewable integration. And most of our renewable units, our sources come from VAE. In fact, 14% right now of our total installed capacity comes from VAE. So as you can see after my right here, you can see the story of how Jamaica has actually installed new wind and solar assets, right, over the past 10 years. In fact, prior to us putting in our new wind facility in 2010, right, if you were to say to me that I was a big fan of renewables, right, you'd be lying. But to see what we have accomplished over 10 years, even as a system operator, I'm very proud to see the proliferation of renewables in our grid. So we started first with our Wigton plant in 2010, and that moved up to a BMR facility, as well as a JPS Monroe plant in 2016. And in addition to that, we got our first solar plant in 2016, somewhere in the central part of the country, the Content Solar. And then now that was complemented towards in 2019 with 37 megawatts of additional solar. What does this mean for all of us? All right, so, okay, fine. We have renewables. Renewables is a very good thing. It helps us to manage with our carbon emissions, keeps down the pollution. It helps to manage our fuel diversification portfolio so that we do not use a lot of fuel in electricity production. The last I checked, Jamaica did not have its own fuel source. So anything that you can do to basically offset imported oil is a very good thing. However, some of these variable renewable energy plants, they come with their own challenges. And the challenges, plain as what I just said, is intermittency, right? The sun does not always shine and the wind doesn't blow. And there are some times in which these two plants are not necessarily in good agreement, right? Where the wind will basically manage the solar and the solar manages the wind, that you might have maximum wind production and no solar and vice versa, right? But then most of the challenges come on days in which you have high wind and high solar and a low overall demand. So what you're looking at here is just a slice of, typically our average minimum load for Jamaica is about 400 megawatts, right? And on a day of good wind and good solar, you might have up to almost 40% of your power coming from these VRE sources. What that means is 40% less space for traditional thermal or firm units that you can actually guarantee that you will get power from. So what happens in a situation like this is that if for whatever reason a huge cloud comes or that and a gust of breeze just suddenly drops off, you will run into issues of having to replace that capacity, because we only supply electricity to our customers as they demand it. That's the nature of the electricity sector. So whenever electricity demand falls off, you have to have something to come in instantly and replace that, or else you'll have to go into the unfortunate load shedding, right? So typically for safe grid operations, you normally want to have about 10% of your typical or spot capacity coming from traditional VRE sources. These are the ones that are intermittent. But if you realize here, according to this graph, on a worst case minimum load day is about 40%. on an average day peak, right, about 580, and that was pre-COVID times, right, we were at 27%. So as a result, these intermittency challenges were wreaking some havoc on the grid. Right? Just to give you a better picture also of where Jamaica is in terms of our electricity breakdown, right? In 2020, in June this year, most of our electricity started to come from combined cycle plants. You see, we're almost up to 13% on renewable energy, right? And this is energy, not capacity we're talking about. Big difference, right? 22% from industrial internal combustion engines and 15% on gas turbines. So this is a makeup of our typical of our energy profile, right? Of how we spread the technologies across to supply the country with electricity. In terms of fuel type, we are now predominantly a country on LNG, a more stable fuel source, stable in terms of fuel costs, right? Versus HFO and LFO, which is liquid fuel oil, right? These prices tend to fluctuate. And we saw a lot of that in March to May of this year, where at one point, the oil providers would be begging you to come and collect a barrel of oil and to store it underneath at your house, right? Should in case you need it. That's how cheap oil prices got to, but we saw those prices coming up. So with this kind of generation mix and this scenario with VRE units in terms of not having dependable capacity coming from wind and solar resources, here's what some of the challenges that we started to face, right? Because of the intermittency problem, there are times in which the wind resource and the solar resource drop off. We had to go into what we call under frequency load shedding or automatic load shedding, right? And this became worse for us as a country in 2016, right? That also resulted in us having to dispatch do more out of merit dispatch, meaning that normally you would try to dispatch the most economic units first. In Jamaica, we use a least cost optimization in terms of how we dispatch our units. So the cheapest units get to the grid first, right? However, the cheapest units might not be the most agile and robust units. And sometimes those gas turbines are units which consume a lot of fuel. We have to bring them online very quickly whenever these renewables were dropping off, just to try and ensure that our customers don't lose power, right? Then there was a point in time in which we just did not have enough fast responding capacity to meet with these intermittency challenges, right? So whenever you lost either some of the firm thermal plant by trips, or you lost the sun, right? We did not have enough quick responding plants on the grid available or in standby to restore power, right? So this was a huge challenge for us, as well as one of the things that we did not have with our VRE plants, especially, most of them were not contracted or obligated to provide the grid with reactive power. And that is something that we need to keep in consideration as we go along. So as a result, when you have a day of 40% of renewables, this is 40% of generation that is providing you with real power, but is not providing you with reactive power, which the traditional thermal or firm units were able to provide. Hence, because of that absence of reactive power support, it would have resulted in low voltages being experienced on the grid. The good thing about Jamaica is yeah man, no problem. We're about solutions. And that is something that everybody in the Caribbean is learning, in that we don't focus on the problems, we focus on the solutions. And being just solution oriented in Jamaica, we here at JPS and in the country, right, through the good work of good collaboration between our government, between our regulator and the utility and other energy providers, we came up with a series of plans, right, to counteract these challenges, to bring balance, right, on the seesaw. So what we saw here is that in situations where we were not able to keep up, right, with the sudden fluctuations of VRE plants, we got our first energy storage unit commissioned in December of 2019, which was at the time the largest hybrid energy storage system in the world, right? And this is for a little small country like Jamaica, right? But just as we know in 2020 cricket, we look about with Talawa, right? So that plant, basically, that's energy storage, helped us to manage all of these under frequency or fluctuations for VRE plants. And as a result, we saw where our under frequency or automatic load shedding, that was reduced almost by 90%, right? Just because of it using implementing our energy storage facility. And next thing that we also did is that we incorporated renewable forecasting into our daily dispatch operations and our operational planning, which is our day to week ahead. And what that does, it basically allows us to have a preemptive strike to look on what the wind projections are, the solar projections, and we are able to dispatch firm units to anticipate sun drop-offs or long-term projections where we will lose in wind plants. Operational situational awareness is something that we also improve in terms of our control room. If I was able to give you a snapshot into our control room right now, which is right up there with the rest of the world, our operators are able to see contingency situations, to see challenges caused by VREs and other transmission constraints that are contributed due to our generation dispatch scenarios. They're able to see that much quicker due to a lot of operational situational awareness tools that we incorporated in our SCADA system, right, as provided by one of our vendors in the US. Also, another big step that Jamaica has done is to replace some of our age-old generation fleet, right? Some of these generators were basically were before we achieved independence in 1962, right? And as good as they were, right, they did their time, did valuable service, but now we're into a series of replacement of some of these units. And that was what we did in between December and March of 2020, right? December 2019 to March 2020, when we replaced almost 280 megawatts of traditional baseload generations with new capacity running on gas, which at the time is cheaper, right? And in most cases, right, is more efficient than the units that were replaced. Then another thing that we did as a grid operator to get rid of some of these voltage issues is to basically, we're embarking now on a scheme as led through our government's IRP, as well as our utility planning, right, to improve our grid power factor or reactive support, to improve the voltage profile of our grid. And to complement that, we are also having a more dynamic spinning reserve. So we basically reviewed our spinning reserve policy to ensure that the units that are on the grid are able to keep up with these solar and wind plants. So for Jamaica, basically the future looks bright. And when I was actually preparing this slide, right, it actually showed me that once you establish a strategy, you are focus oriented and stick to it, right, that you will actually start to see the fruits of your labor, right? We'll pick off little battles every day. So coming from 2013 and projecting out to 2014, almost over 10 years, you can see the sudden step changes that we have been doing in JPS and in Jamaica as an energy sector, where, for example, in 2013 to 17, our renewable penetration was somewhere lower than, it was actually 8%, right? Currently, we're up to 14%. And the projections by 2024 will be going up to 25%, which means almost 200 megawatts of new renewables will be included in our grid within that time. We're moving to modernize our grid in terms of adding more energy storage, including distribution management systems, because the grid now, the traditional grid of generation and transmission, will be migrating down to the distribution level. So as a grid operator, we need to become prepared for that. EV charging, a next big thing, Devon mentioned it about buses and transportation system. JPS is embarking on a new project to implement charging stations all over the country to basically to start to pilot this drive for having new electricity charging vehicles on the grid. As well as one of the things that we are planning to do here is, through our wealth of experience that we have been growing over the years, to have a operations training center, which will be done for the regional level, so that basically we can share our ideas and develop our system operators. So in a sense, the future for JPS and Jamaica and the Caribbean looks bright, right? So that is it where Jamaica is concerned, and that's our renewable energy story. Right? Devon, I put you to sleep?
No, Linka, sorry.
Are you intrigued?
I'm intrigued. I'm just amazed at how much you guys have done. Let me put the camera back on. I wanted to see the bandwidth. and I didn't want to distract people with my image. But thanks, Linka. That was a masterclass in terms of us getting an overview of the system. We will naturally revert to you with some discussions in a few, but thanks for that excellent overview so far. Definitely, I will want to know the cost implications in terms of numbers, if you have any at some point, but you can hold on to that in your pipe. We'll get there in a bit. If you could think about it in the background, if you can get some numbers and costs in terms of per kilowatt hour when you add different amounts of renewables in the system, as well as the storage, what the cost would typically would look like in terms of changes upward or downward to customers. But we'll get there. And not for you to answer now. We'll move on to Sheena now, and give you a chance to rest in the meantime. So, ladies and gentlemen, you would have heard Linka speak a lot about wind and solar and battery being integrated. Belize, Sheena, I was already introduced and the Belize system was introduced. I will, without further ado, turn over to Belize. As I mentioned, Belize has the big battery of Mexico, as well as a lot of hydro and biomass in their systems, and some small amounts of solar. But Sheena will walk us through that and tell us about Belize. Thank you.
Thank you. I will not turn on the video. I'm trying to see if bandwidth, we have some weather passing through. All right, it's a pleasure to be here to share Belize's experience as it relates to renewable integration within our grid. Geographically, Belize is located within Central America and is a part of the Caribbean as well. We're bordered by Mexico and Guatemala, and we have the Caribbean Sea on the east. BEL is the primary transmission and distribution company of electricity in Belize. We purchase power from independent power producers. Our peak demand in 2019 was approximately 111 megawatt. Our customer base was around 98,000 customers. The population of Belize is around 400,000. On the graph to the left, you would see the grid showing our transmission lines, our generation sources, and our substations. On the mainland, all these municipalities are connected to the main grid, with the exception of the island of Kikaka. That's on the right, the dot on the right-hand side. They have diesel generation units at this point. Our interconnection to Mexico allows us to import up to a maximum of 55 megawatt. BEL is considered the leading green electric utility in the Caribbean, and we're top 5 in the Western Hemisphere. We have available in-country capacity of 95 megawatts, with composition mainly of hydros, which is 57%. We have biomass, our bagasse plants that are located, one in north and one in the west. Our hydros are mainly located in the west, but we have a small plant in the south. We have a solar pilot project that's in the central part in Belmopan, and fossil fuel sources in the south. BEL owns a gas turbine that we use for emergency conditions that's located within the central zone as well. So in conjunction with the generation units, the diesel units that we have at Kikaka, those are the only 2 generating sources owned by BEL. The network shows our transmission grid being interconnected to Mexico at 115 kV. We have transmission voltages ranging from 115, 69 to 34.5. We have distribution voltages from 22, 11, 13.2, and 6.6 kV. The blue dots are substations, while the green dots are our renewable generation sources. The black dots are indicating our fossil fuel plants. So we have 30 substation and 44 distribution feeders in the network. Looking into the future, the updated graph on the right-hand side is showing the inclusion of solar into our system. As mentioned before, we have hydros incorporated into our network already. We currently have 67% of local renewable integration, and we're aiming to go above 75% within our 4-year scope. So we have 4 solar plants being proposed to be incorporated into our network. Those are the yellow dots that you would see on the map. We also have a gas plant, a LPG gas plant, to be connected in the southern region. This is not a renewable plant, but it's a low carbon plant that would help to support the renewable integration as well. From a transmission point of view, we have a submarine cable that would interconnect Kikaka to the mainland. This would be very beneficial for us to have all the main islands and the municipalities within Belize connected as a part of the main grid to be able to benefit from whichever sources we're purchasing power from at that time in order to reduce the cost of power, the total cost of power. The generating units would still remain at Kikaga, more as a peak shaving until the second submarine cable is connected from San Pedro to the mainland. You would see that red line going to the islands. As a proposal, we have a second transmission line that would interconnect us to Mexico, coming more to the western region, the red line. This is in line with our scope. We're looking to integrate more renewables into our system. Since we already have hydros, we're focusing more on utility solar at this point. So with that and the increase in country generation mix, we would be able to have an opportunity to even export energy if needed to the Mexico grid. The solar plant and what you see beyond the horizon within the graph on the left-hand side are projects that have been selected from a request for proposals in 2013 that was sent out by the PUC for renewable energy projects. So we have 15 megawatts of solar that was selected, and the new hydro Chaleo that was also selected. Looking back at 2018, 2019, we had severe drought conditions that affected our hydro production. So seeing the generation mix that I mentioned before, that hydro plays a key role in our renewable mix and our total generation mix for Belize, that had a heavy impact on us. So we were left in a position where we were heavily reliant on the interconnection to Mexico. There's also the issue that the biomass plants, the bagasse plants, are seasonal. Their production is mainly focused in the first half of the year, a bit extended into the first 2 months of the second half of the year, where they have a bit of storage, but mainly they're available for only the first half of the year. So seeing that and the extended drought that affected us for the last 2 years, the company made a decision to install more in-country generation, more renewables into the mix to give us a more diverse mix, such that we don't have to have that heavy reliance on Mexico. There's volatility in the Mexican market. They would submit prices 2 days ahead, and we would have to make a commitment at that time. Then when the actual price does come out afterwards, it can fluctuate from what was initially proposed. And it's not very predictable what the prices would be, because this also includes congestion charges for the network. So that would reduce our reliance on them. We have conducted a PV penetration study that's ongoing. The scope is to evaluate multiple PV deployment scenarios on the performance and the stability of the grid. It will look at the cost implication, any potential for exports, what would be the preferred generation portfolio. This goes in line with detailing out the 45 megawatts of solar that I had mentioned before that we have in the pipeline. So these would give us the optimal location and all the details with regards to PV penetration within our network. We know looking into the future that we'll have variability of solar, like Lincoln mentioned, but with our interconnection to Mexico, we believe that that grid would allow us to be able to handle the fluctuation and the quick responses while providing the reactive power that is needed at this time. So that interconnection would still play a key role, even though we're moving towards RE within Belize, we still would use that connection, the benefits of that connection, because when Mexico prices are low, we would also be able to benefit from that low cost of power as well. So it can add stability to the network as well. The LPG plant, as I mentioned, down south would not be a renewable plant, but it would also support and complement the renewable mix that we're proposing. So BL is looking to increase its renewable in-country generation mix, so above 75% within the next 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Sheena. Excellent all the way around. That definitely gives us quite a bit to chew on. I noticed there's quite a lot of questions flying in left, right, and center. And I will definitely give you an opportunity as soon as I've heard from St. Kitts to interact with the panelists with those questions. Some of the questions, I see some panelists have already attempted to answer, and some of them are intended to be answered live. But if you give us another 10 minutes to allow Jonathan Kelly of St. Kitts to make his intervention, then we will come back to the questions and interactions with you, the participants, as we would like to be able to have all three, in some instances, panelists weigh in if there is a question that relates to all three. So I will, at this stage, turn over to Jonathan Kelly from SKELEC and ask Jonathan to give us his presentation on the St. Kitts system, both in terms of the current state and, of course, where it is that we can derive understanding from their integration of renewable energy in their system. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Dr. Gardner, thank you for this opportunity provided by you and the CARICOM team. Everyone can see my screen?
Yes, Jonathan, your screen is being viewed. Thank you.
And you can hear me loud and clear. So I'm going to leave the video off just to, as you said, reduce the bandwidth consumption that you could.
Yes, perfect. We hear you loud and clear. And if you leave the video off, that's fine. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay, so this is going to be a brief presentation, and we're going to be talking about grid integration or renewable energy from the perspective of SKELEC. Dr. Gardner would have already gave some introductory overview of where we are at SKELEC and what we intend to do. And so without further ado, I'm just going to get into it, talk about the existing power system and energy characteristics. 44.9 megawatt nameplate installed diesel generation capacity, 18 megawatts base load, 30 megawatt peak, that would have been in 2019, 12, 11 kV distribution feeders. For those of you who don't know, St. Kitts is a very small island, part of the Island Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, population approximately 54,000. We have a customer base of about 23,000. And in this graph, you can see how the demand would have been trending over the past few years. And you could also see how our grid is actually constructed, and it's just radial distribution from a centralized diesel power plant. Now, Dr. Gardner would have, in his opening remark, referenced some grid-tied solar PV generation. And you're probably wondering, well, why isn't it listed here? Okay, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit further on in my actual concluding slide. Okay, so in the future, SKELEC, you know, we're ambitious, we're small, we punch above our weight. I mean, we're very small compared to our colleagues like in Jamaica and Belize. Nonetheless, we have great ambitions and we're going to be doing great things in the future. So by 2022, we anticipate, you know, having at least 30% of our annual electricity generation coming from renewable, and this is primarily going to be solar PV. But in making this step on the evolution towards where we want to be in the future, we are focusing on efficiency, resilience, reliability, flexibility, and sustainability. Lots of abilities in there, right? And presently, we are looking at integrating 35.6 megawatts of solar PV, and that will be coupled with 44.2 megawatt hours of battery energy storage. And this is an IP-owned project, and this is all integrated under a PPA. And the terms and conditions of that PPA is to be able to provide 12 to 18 megawatts of baseload solar energy into our grid between the hours of 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. daily. So when you look at it as a percentage of our peak of 30 megawatts, that will constitute about 40 to 60%, okay? Roughly around 124 megawatt hours daily. Some of the other things that we're considering is deploying a rooftop solar PV microgrid, and this is going to be in low-income housing areas. Dr. Gardner would have referenced some of the other things that we're looking at in terms of geothermal and wind. As you know, the islands of St. Kitts and Nevis have surface manifestations of geothermal resource. Surface explorations would have been already started several years ago. And at some point in the future, geothermal will be integrated. So if you look at that pie chart there in 2020, we're looking at 100% renewable by that time. I mean, this is integrating all the resources that we would have available. Now, the actual percentage by that time may not be as illustrated here, but it sets a goal towards which you're going to work. And of course, as Dr. Gardner would have asked and probably mentioned, would there still be considerations for the St. Kitts and Nevis grid interconnection? And of course, it is a no-brainer, really, when you think about it. Islands this close and having this abundant resource, you look at it from the standpoint of actually flexibility and having that maximization of indigenous renewable resources, it makes sense for us to actually do that. And the general manager, Clement Jomo Williams, I'm sure many of you are friends with him, has said that this is his legacy that he wants to leave before he goes to integrate SKELEC and NEVLEC. So we shall definitely hold into that and we'll work towards it. And in terms of working towards increasing our resilience, as we are aware that we are part of the Caribbean and we're prone to these very severe storms as a result of climate change, we're looking to place our entire 11 kV distribution network underground, okay? So in terms of our preparatory steps towards increasing renewable energy integration, you can broadly look at it in two categories, you know, low-hanging and further reaching. Because on the low-hanging side, it makes no sense to you be signing on to PPAs and to be looking at putting down renewable energy plan, whether it is variable or otherwise. And you don't really consider, well, how is energy actually being consumed? How are you using it? Are there actually losses? Is it actually being efficient, right? So one of the things that we are looking at right now, what's ongoing, first of all, from the energy efficiency standpoint, we have the ongoing LED streetlight retrofit project that is sponsored by the CDB. We've also recently, and as this is Energy Month, we would have a couple of days ago gone through the island and be distributing LED bulbs to homes and businesses. And another key thing, which is very important for utilities, is reducing the non-technical losses and increasing our metering and billing accuracy. And we have recently deployed an AMI system, and we have already been seeing the benefits of this. So on the further reaching side, integration into island grids, especially grids such as ours, which are islanded in that they're not interconnected to any sort of mainland or anything that we're buying energy from. When integrating variable renewable resources and technologies, you have to be very careful to ensure that all designs would, one, not compromise the existing system, not cause any sort of power quality issues, and ensure that also from the integrated resource standpoint that to meet future demands, that there is never a situation of a shortage of capacity. So studies and designs are essential. A key point in the transition is you have to always bring your staff on the journey with you. You cannot then make this sort of rapid transition overnight or a paradigm shift and leave your staff behind. So we are looking at building knowledge base and capacity internally. We have been able to have the support of the Caribbean Development Bank and OECS have sponsored NABCEP solar PV certification, which has been facilitated by Green Solution International, Dr. Wayne Archibald, Randy Dunton. These guys have been conducting training programs with us here in St. Denis and also throughout the Caribbean. And this is essential because for many years, you look at it in terms of expertise. So sometimes we always have to be dependent on getting persons in from overseas to be able to do, plant maintenance and construction, troubleshooting and stuff like that. One of the things that COVID has really highlighted is the need for building localized capacity, because when you have travel restrictions and lockdowns and stuff like that, but you still have to, meet demand and have plants and everything operational, you have to really have highly skilled and trained persons on island as well. In addition to that, you have to continuously build grid resilience and flexibility, as I said before, and deploying a smart grid, unifying hybridized generation and all these different components. And one of the things I have to touch on here, particularly emphasize, is efficient low carbon thermal generation. In some conversation, in certain circles, depending on who you speak to, it is sometimes easy to slide towards demonizing thermal generation really, really quickly in terms of looking at a transition. You want often 100% transition overnight. But realistically, that is not always possible. And some of the times you look at it, on islands where you have limited space, and you look at it in terms of just a footprint for putting down, for example, variable renewables such as solar plants and actual wind turbines and stuff, we do not have large amounts of space. So then comparing footprint of a thermal plant to a variable renewable plant and looking at that trade-off in terms of availability, reliability, and stuff like that, some of the times you will still always may have to have that bit of thermal as a backup. But then in making the transition, what you will notice is happening in industry is that the providers such and OEMs such as like Watzilla and MEN, they have now realized that as the industry changes, they have to provide products that are flexible and more efficient and able to work with variable renewable technologies. So this is one of the things that utilities have to always keep into mind when looking at making that transition, that on a day-to-day basis, they still have to be able to provide a reliable power supply at all times. And then, of course, we're also looking at deploying EV fleet and facilitating EV proliferation. And this is also in keeping with our INDCs of by the year 2030, reducing our carbon emissions by at least 35%. So to summarize, lessons learned so far: importance of enforcing standards in renewable energy plant design and build. And this is now going back to what I would have said earlier. We have 2 solar plants that are not operational, and they have been so for several months now, we're going into years, since about 2018. And this largely has been just as a result of the quality of build. And it is something that perhaps when you look at it on like mainland countries, they would have very stringent codes and standards for building of plant. In the Caribbean, we probably have to work towards this and make sure that there are certain considerations for quality and design that are one, able to withstand hurricane force winds and also our corrosive environment, because the salinity sometimes will just in a quick time destroy components unless specified to be able to withstand that. So definitely we have to look at building resiliency to withstand hurricanes. There is no point having a renewable energy plant and there is no grid. So that's why we're looking at going underground. And then energy storage is essential for increasing penetration into island grids without compromising power quality. And energy management systems becomes the nucleus of linking all of this together. Because having that intelligence and that automation to be able to instantaneously balance demand and supply with energy storage is essential, and it actually makes life a lot easier for grid operators. In the future, considering existing and planned diesel generation, you have to look at it in terms of efficiency and flexibility, and making sure that if considerations are put for replacing plant, that the plant that comes on, one, is flexible, is fast starting, and operates at efficiency and low load efficiencies that would still be able to improve the overall performance of the system integrated with variable renewables. Electric vehicle proliferation is an essentiality, and I think, as Dr. Gardner has already said, a lot of the larger countries have already stipulated moving away from internal combustion engines. So we too have to get on board with this transition. And towards achieving our INDCs, this is essential as well. So we have to always remember to reach for a low-hanging fruit in terms of energy efficiency and loss reduction. Ensure that the employees have the buy-in and are champions for the energy paradigm shift through training awareness, and also make sure that you build local knowledge base and skill level in renewable energy technology. So that will conclude what I'll have to say for now, and let's move on with the dialogue. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I noticed one of your points on your concluding slides where you said no point having the generators without the grid in respect to resiliency. Also, but even more profound, no point having the grid without customers. So the grid resiliency is an entire value chain. And in some instances, to have even heard some, people, utility operators set them in there, and at the end of the day, I don't want to be walking up and down picking up solar panels after the hurricane. So, it's not, nowadays everything is affected, both from the supply side to the distribution and demand side, and with of course the transmission system in between. So resilience is a total value chain solution, not something that focuses on the grid only. So I just wanted to point that out as something that has been discussed and is part of the integrated resource and resilience plan that we are working on within the region. Now, lots of questions, lots of conversations. I want to start with a conversation that I know Linkai attempted to answer in the chat, but nevertheless, I will bring it out into the fore because it's an important one that was asked. The question that Elizabeth Butler, and good morning, Elizabeth. I see you are very active in the chat. Elizabeth Butler asked the question about integrated resource planning and sought to understand, how it is that JPS utilizes or undertakes integrated resource planning in respect to the system operation, trying to see how it is that the system operation itself is being affected by the IRP results, recognizing that Jamaica recently, just for those who don't know, completed an integrated resource plan, and this integrated resource plan for Jamaica is driving quite a bit on the, if you want to call it, the investment side in terms of future planning. So in that regard, Elizabeth had asked to understand how the IRP is therefore driving much of the decisions in respect to system planning and the integration of different technologies within the system. That is what was asked. And she specifically asked for the description of JPS's planning and studies that were required to implement the IRP and to understand the costs involved. So Lincoln, I know you answered, but for the purpose of the meeting, I'm going to ask you to speak to how it is that the IRP that Jamaica has now launched is influencing the work that you are doing in respect to system planning, and how it is that the IRP implementation is likely to affect the system operation costs, if you already know those answers. And once you have spoken about that, I'm going to ask Gary Jackson. I'm telling him up front because he's online, and I don't want to surprise him. I'm going to ask Gary Jackson from the Secret to jump in and speak about some of the work that will be done on the integrated resource and resilience planning, which is an upgrade from the IRP, so that we can understand how those things will mesh eventually. So link over to you, then to Gary, and then we'll come back again for other questions. Thanks.
All right, so hear me, Gary? Hear me, Devon?
Yes, man, I hear you. Perfect.
Okay, sorry. So a very active chat room, right? Answering as much as the questions as we can, and very excellent presentations also by Sheena and Jonathan. So to answer the question posed in the group about the IRP planning process. So in Jamaica, the IRP planning process was led by our Ministry of Energy, right? And we sought up, and they got support from the utility, from the regulators, right, which in Jamaica is the Office of Utilities Regulation, as well as other private energy stakeholders, other IPPs, for providing the input information, right? And what we had at one point, almost on a daily basis, was regular collaborative meetings between all entities, all players sat at the table, right? We provided the input information, signed off on the input, and then in terms of the analysis, we used a software provided by a group in the US and also Australia called Plexus by the Energy Exemplar Group. And what that software helps us to do is that it helps us to do a least cost generation expansion plan, but it is superimposed on a transmission network. So what that means is that basically, once a generation result is obtained, automatically the dispatch results are loaded into a transmission network to measure, observe for power flows, right? To see if there are any contingency violations that will result. And right away, if there are some types of abnormal dispatching, which you will never get from your traditional do an expansion plan, you take out some spot values for your low load scenarios, your day peak scenarios, your highest peak scenarios, or even peak scenarios, and you take those spot loads and use those spot loads now to do our transmission, steady state, and dynamic analysis. What the software that we use helps us to do is that it looks at different dispatch scenarios at all times of day, right, down to, I think we did 13-minute resolutions of data, right, for about 20 years worth of generation dispatch simulation. And it looked to see if there were any resulting transmission contingency violations, at least from a load flow perspective, that was caused by this generation expansion result. And if it required a transmission expansion option, which is to put in a new line, new substation, or a transformer, which would further inflate the cost of putting in such a generation project, then successive iterations would be done of the simulation to try and say, okay, that solution was probably not the best solution. Let's try a generation solution that has a minimum impact on the transmission, and at the end of the day will achieve the lowest cost of energy towards the customers, right? And then after that was done and you ended up with a preferred generation option with a somewhat DC power flow transmission and not transmission results, you took that now and move that over to another transmission software, doing some marketing now for the guys, right, which is called a distillate power factory software. And what that does, it helps us now to look on the dynamic environment created by this new grid. Because whether or not we like it, all of us now live in a world that is totally new and unknown, right? So you will have to be, as engineers, as planners, as financiers and everything, you have to be living in a simulated world, which means you have to sign off on your input results, you have to calibrate your models, tune and test them to the point where you're comfortable, and then from there, launch all future projections with different sensitivities for load growth or load reduction, changes in fuel prices, right? And also how these will impact your T&D network. So those are some of the things that's led out by the ministry in collaboration with JPS and the utility. We have done some of these analysis, and the stage that we are now is that after the conclusion of the technical analysis, the regulator now is assisting the ministry in coming up with the final tariff prices, right, which is the costs for the different rate groups, right, to come up with a cost to ensure that the objective function of the IRP, which is to provide low and cheaper cost generation for the Jamaican public, that objective is observed. That is the ultimate thing. Can't be putting in new plants that will be driving up energy costs, right? You have to be doing solutions that drive the prices down, especially in a COVID world where people are losing their jobs and there's not a lot of money going around.
Thank you very much, Linkai. Excellent points. And, you know, it's always one of the dilemmas which a lot of countries face. You know, people are asking for many different things. You know, resilience, flexibility, you name it, reliability, stability, and clean at the same time. And they want to be able to sell power to the when they want to and however they want to through whatever form. But then there's also the demand for the prices to remain cheap. So it's really a lot of demands that have been made at the system at the same time. Gary, if you would jump in, speak a little bit about the IRRP in 2 minutes. And I wanted to address a question which is also coming up on the resilience of the lines themselves. Colleagues are asking whether it wouldn't make sense to bury the transmission lines and what that would mean in terms of cost implications. I know we have global numbers about, you know, cost of lines underground being about 14 times higher than the cost of lines overhead, but is that something you could talk to in that sense, if you don't mind? Thanks.
Thanks, Devon. Thanks, Linkoy. Jonathan, good to see you online. Sheena, morning. All right, so we are embarking on an integrated resource and resilience plan for 5 of our member states. And important to this process, what Linkoy would have mentioned to you earlier would take into consideration an integrated resource plan, with the exception that he didn't get into details yet about the demand side measures that would have to be taken into consideration, and also the distribution planning in the way that we believe is evolving into a new space when you talk about distributed generation and electric mobility. Now, the resilience component is what is going to be an integral and important part to the dynamics of this integrated resource and resilience plan. Understanding temperature rise, understanding sea level rise, understanding things that the Sahara does, heat waves, droughts, and Sheena would have spoken about that in some regard in terms of when you're having a drought and your hydros are suffering. When you have a lot of rainfall, which would have experienced in Jamaica and in Barbados and a number of countries recently, you'd have low solar. In addition, you have saturated land that is losing power lines because of poles that are collapsing because the land is so saturated. So you have landslide. So all of these are vulnerabilities that we are seeing in the system. And what the integrated resource and resilience plan is intended for is to do an overlay, understanding where those vulnerabilities are, and establish what we call now a least regret and not so much of a least cost. What the least regret does is looks further down the path of long-term impact that climate will have on these systems and make a determination based on, as Lincoln mentioned, based on consultation amongst the key stakeholders of what will be the preferred option as it relates to safeguarding these systems based on probability. So some of it is going to be statistical, similar to how you'll have run your demand forecast, and understanding how these systems will actually be impacted and what would be some of the things that you will have to consider. So distributed generation seem to be a mode of considering resilience in systems. To the degree of how that expands is going to be a result of what comes out of the larger plan, as Lincoln had mentioned, in terms of your stability and your dynamic study that you'll have to consider for your generation. So on the large scale, you have the utility on the big generators, and then on behind the distribution side, now you have the distributed generations, and all of that have to be collective in determining what would be your final plan going into the future. So more complexity to the situation, but it provides us an opportunity to make the right decisions given our climate variabilities that are impacting not only conventional plants, because conventional plants are getting heat waves, so heat rates are going up, more cost is going to be involved, but also renewable energy, which is not the panacea, they are also being impacted by the changes in climate, and we have to recognize that as well and see how these different technologies with energy storage is actually going to play a role that was going to give us what Devon mentioned: reliability, sustainability, and affordability at the same time. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. And interestingly, sometimes when we talk about costs, let me give you a back of the envelope calculation in terms of cost. Belize currently its tariff is around 28 cents per kilowatt hour US, and Sheena mentioned. The value of load loss in Belize is $7.80 US cents, $7.80, sorry, per kilowatt hour. So think about it. You're paying 28 cents per kilowatt hour to get electricity, but the value of losing that kilowatt hour is about $7.80 in terms of GDP production. So would you rather probably pay 32 cents and keep the lights on so you can get more GDP earned, or would you prefer to pay the cheapest and then run the risk of losing that load? Food for thought. Moving to the next, to Sheena, as there's so much talk about Belize. There is a question that was raised, which is an interesting one, and I found it to be one that I am also interested in understanding, because I still don't know the answer to that question yet. Someone asked about the fact that the cost for the tariff in Belize. The question was really, if it is that you have such an high share of hydro in your system, why are you at 28 cents per kilowatt hour? Why are you not lower? I don't know if that's something that you could already take on. And once you have taken that on, Sheena, there are two other things that I want you to take on that are, in a sense, linked. One of the questions is in respect to the impact that the drought would have had on the CFE costs when you had to depend on CFE for the additional power that would have been required when your drought would have reduced your hydropower availability. So the person is asking, I think it's Hugh Dwyer, has been asking, how did CFE, how did the CFE additional power supply affect the prices for bill? Did it drive them up? Did it, or did it remain stable? And related also is one last question too, where Rick Case asked about the interconnection. He wanted to get some description on the lines and the transmission lines. If you could give some idea on the capacity of the lines and so on, and the length of the lines. He had asked about that. And there was also another question, I can't remember who that one was from, that are related to the system that spoke about whether you are looking to integrate into this, the CPAC system, and you could tell about the CPAC when you answer that, whether Belize is looking to move from just the CFE connection and integrate more widely into CPAC as part of the Central American system, and whether the intention is to eventually sell power within the wholesale CPAC market. Lots of questions, but all related to the interconnection into the Central American system, especially in particular with Mexico. Would you be able to answer those questions, or you want me to repeat any of them, or did you catch them all?
I got them.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to start by clarifying the average cost of electricity in Belize at this point is 21 cents US. Even though we have a lot of renewables, like you mentioned, the hydros, we still rely on purchase from Mexico. In my presentation, you would see that the Mexico prices are not set, or in-country generation prices are set with the PPAs, and we know what these would be. Our hydros range from 6.75 cents US to 12.5 cents US. Our biomass range from 10 to 18 cents US, and then we have the fossil fuel plants around 12 to 14 cents, depending on fuel and efficiency. But the variability comes in with the purchase from Mexico, where we cannot project accurately what the price from Mexico would be on that spot market at any given time. And we have to make a commitment 2 days ahead when they give us the proposed prices, including the congestion charges. So as you mentioned, that is where our variability in our cost of power currently comes from. And that is a part of the problem that we want to resolve with increasing renewables in country and having more generation sources in country, such that that dependency is not as heavy, and we can benefit from the interconnection when there's an opportunity, or when there's cheaper power, but it's not necessarily needed in order to supply the grid. Going to the drought conditions in 2018, 2019, yes, that had an impact on us for the cost of power aspect. The CFE, as I mentioned, is variable. We've had prices from 4 cents US per kilowatt hour going as high as 90 cents US per kilowatt hour during that drought condition. And we had to take it because we were dependent on them. The drought that affected us also affected some of their renewable plants as well. So they were pushing out more expensive energy as well. So we've had variation in prices from them. And yes, that was a driver for our cost of power during that drought period. And the question with regards to the new interconnection that we want with Mexico that's going towards the western region of the country, a study was done looking at CPAC, as you mentioned, focusing on Guatemala and looking at a second line to Mexico. So a comparison was done, various scenarios were evaluated, and at the end it was recommended that either a 115 or a 230 kV line from Mexico would be sufficient at that point. The distance would be around 200 to 220 kilometers from the Mexican border to the Camalote area in the Cayo district. I'm not sure if there was any part of the question that I missed, but at the end of our 5-year plan, we want to stabilize cost of power to below 14 cents US per kilowatt hour. So that is our aim in order to stabilize cost of power, and as a result, stabilize the average cost of electricity in Belize.
Thank you very much, Sheena. And yes, you did answer all the questions suitably. Thank you very much. I just want to point out too, one of the things that hasn't come up in the conversation with regards to Belize, which is an important fact for people to know, is that there is what we call a social tariff in Belize. That is a safety net for those who are vulnerable groups. So in a sense, what you see as the tariff that is currently, represented takes into consideration the fact that some of that tariff is actually contributing to the social safety net for the vulnerable who would not have been able to perhaps afford electricity in their own right. So both in respect to the regular grid as well as to microgrids, which is something we haven't spoken about at all in today's conversation in detail. There is, if you, so I maybe should refer to it for what it is, a cross subsidization that takes place in the Belize situation. So we should understand that it's not just, the tariff is not just a reflection of what's going on in the system, but there is also social considerations built into the tariff, just for the record. Thanks for that. Great. Jonathan, you haven't gotten away, so you are next. I see a couple of questions here for you. I know one question which came up is not for you, it's higher than our peer grade. One of the questions about whether we're going to send Kitts and Nevis will do two separate geothermal projects or one. Those kind of questions, I wouldn't put you on the spot with my brethren. These questions you and I can't answer. but the point is that you have articulated quite, quite clearly the view of interconnection as a useful tool to give you some amount of flexibility and some better, if you want to call it, load shifting capabilities and all of that. And given that St. Kitts and St. Vincent are practically two very different, if you want to call it, economies in their own right in terms of patterns of behavior and all of that kind of thing. So the load would be very different. I see one of the questions which has been asked is related to geothermal projections, and the question, and they're asking really about where are you, whether you are really, what's the level of confidence if that is supporting geothermal by 2030. Can you give us some sense as to where the project is or where the considerations are with respect to the geothermal development?
Okay. In the past, you would have, been part and parcel, I think, Dr. Gardner, in the discussions around geothermal development and saying it's a Nevis, there would have been a lot of different forums and stuff like that. There would also be in the memorandum of understanding, which was signed several years ago to do this first exploration. Since that, you would have seen that there would have been some, challenges, some delays, some back and forth with that. But irrespective of that, right? I mean, we know that geothermal is a significant capex undertaking, and in terms of the exploration process and development, there are several risks associated with that, and there would have been a lot of de-risking conversations and multilaterals looking at contributing towards that. So in terms of looking at in terms of where it is always present and there, but in terms of to say no for now, as we draw to the close of 2020, has there been any recent developments? No, there hasn't been. But there's still ongoing internal conversations at the different levels, ministerial and otherwise, at looking at realistically pushing towards having geothermal further developed and on-grid by, let's say, 2020.
All right, thanks for that. Let me jump over to the distribution side. There's quite a bit have been asked on the distributed side. There are questions regarding, but there's one question from Colin Jenkins that is directed at Linkai. And Linkai, he's asking about distributed wind, building-based wind turbines. And I know JPS at one point, even at its own building-based wind turbines, both in its New Kingston office as well as out in the boulevard and out that side. So you should have some good understanding in terms of the wind performance, I would presume, from those, albeit small. And Digicel also had some on its building downtown. Have you been able to determine at JPS whether this is something you want to encourage, the whole issue of distributed wind building-based wind designs within your system? That's a question that is coming that I want Linkai to address in particular. And there are questions for Belize in regards to interconnection and distributed PV and distributed generation being allowed to sell back to the grid. So after Linkai, I want to answer the question about distributed wind. I want him to speak about the experience of distributed generation in Jamaica that is pretty much in terms of bidirectional power flow. What has been the impact of those systems on his grid service operation, the ones who are operating under the standard of a contracts? Now, how much standard of a contract you have, how much megawatts you get it from those, and what have been the impact on the system? And then once you have finished, I will jump over to Belize and ask them, based on your experience, what are their views? As you have the experience with the bidirectional power flow from PV and to a lesser extent, wind, based on the SOCs. Thanks.
Well, you mentioned a good point earlier, talking about things that are above your pay grade, right? So the standard offer contracts are the net billing initiative that is currently being done here, is basically within the ambit of the ministry. They are the ones now who basically have taken over control of that part of the electricity sector and that management. But in terms of distributed generation, right, there are a couple of projects that we have, and we had even a mini hydro at one of our plants, about 800 kilowatt hydro plant. Then there was the Monroe, right? Not the JPS Monroe at first, but there's one of the high schools in Jamaica. They had a pilot project somewhere before 2010 thereabout, after having their own distributed wind generation. And then JPS did one in, I think, about 2010, which is a 3 megawatt installation in the same Monroe vicinity, right? What we saw from them is the distributed generating plants, as well as the utility scale, they were operating on almost the same levels of capacity factor, right? Ranging between 25 to about 30%, right? So they were performing in line with the traditional utility scale. I think the only drawbacks that you'll have there with the distributed generation on the wind side, right, is that any DGs connected to the distribution system, the distribution system is not as strong as a transmission network, right? You are more susceptible to faults, right? Momentary faults, or even you might have a situation whereby the level of poor quality management that has to be done on distributed wind or PV plants sometimes might directly cause a problem to other customers. So this is something that with the ministry and us, we're trying to basically to streamline that process to ensure that any new players in the net billing space that provide power, bidirectional power, that one, they do it safely as possible, because the grid operator sometimes has to do maintenance work on the distribution lines, and you want to ensure that the safety of the persons who are working is maintained. Then the other part of it is that the poor quality issues, that they are managed as best as possible in terms of frequency and voltage management, primarily voltage management, right? Because you don't want to have a liability situation where one customer who is participating in net billing, because of the level of power, if his equipment is not proactive or sensitive enough to disconnect before causing
Linkai? We lost you momentarily. All right, we lost Linkai for a second here. So I think he's pretty much, yeah, so he's been able to answer 90% of what was asked. What he's pretty much speaking about is the fact that, yes, they recognize the issues of customer interconnection to the distribution side, and they have grid codes, very strong grid codes, and they are, of course, working through some of the nuances with the regulator in that regard. Linkai, you're back?
Yeah, just as I say, it's a part of the distribution system. It's momentary of the communication.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, so sorry about that. So we are actually involved in that space. In fact, even on my side as a system operator, we're starting to put plans in place to ensure that we can manage more distributed generators connected to the grid to help with the whole matter of resilience right, to help with the formation of microgrids, so that if, for example, small pockets of customers should be mainstream grid, right, that they can operate in isolated pockets of microgrids. So in terms of distributed energy resource management tools, even in the SCADA system, one of the plans is for us to implement these resources within the next 2-3 years, right? And then we'll be rolling out a series of distributed generating projects come January next year. And I know that other private entities will also want to participate in that, right? Because as Devon said, this is probably a part of where the entire energy sector is going to lean towards, right? So your grid of the future must be capable of not only standing alone on the distribution side, but then whenever there are issues, it can be connected to the transmission. But for natural disasters or what have you, or grid emergencies or contingencies, then a split should be obtained, and both grids, you should have all the necessary management tools and systems to ensure that the customer can benefit either from the bulk transmission network or the distribution network. And these are things in which we are partnering with in the energy sector to put in place.
Thanks very much, Linka. I appreciate it. And I know Stephanie got a bit frustrated because she had directed her question at Belize, but I asked you first. And that was deliberately so, because you have perhaps the most experience in Jamaica with much of this work. So it was interesting to hear from you first before we go over to Belize and ask them, you know, what are their intentions, if there are any yet. And again, I'm mindful of how much I put Sheena on the spot. She's not the decision maker in terms of whether customer interconnection is allowed or not. This is a PUC decision. But of course, what I will try to understand from Sheena is whether or not this is, from what she understands within the different filings with the PUC, whether this is something that is being contemplated. Where is the conversation? She can't say whether it is allowed unless that decision is already made, but I would like to understand from her where it is in the conversation at this point. And of course, recognizing too that there is work, a body of work that is emerging within the region around the integrated utility services. And Belize and Jamaica are two of the participants in an initiative. We are in the Secretariat of CARICOM along with a number of its partners. The CCRE and all of those entities are working closely with the electric utilities to build out a program where customers will be able to finance through their unbilled tariff the ability to do distributed energy resources or work behind the meter, so to speak, the proverbial meter. So things from solar PV on the rooftop, solar water heating, distributed wind, even efficient cogeneration, distributed cogeneration, all these things, even electric vehicles eventually. So anything that is under that is considered within the portfolio of distributed energy resources is being considered where the utility invests and the customers pay for it on their bill. This is actually a real project that is happening now in Belize, in Barbados, in Guyana, and Jamaica. Elizabeth Butler is online. I saw Elizabeth earlier, and I want to give a shout out to her. She has been working as part of the consultancy team, helping to develop and design what this will look like, so that we can get to a stage where customers are actually able to walk into an electric utility and say, I don't want to get most of my electricity from the grid. I want to get 70% from the from rooftop PV and 30% from the grid. And my bill should reflect that investment. And then the utility will work with that customer to actually implement according to the customer's desire. The customer pays for the investment on the grid through whatever mechanism is determined financially between the utility, the regulator, and the customer. The regulator, of course, acting as a referee, supporting the customer's interests. So let me ask Sheena to just jump in and say what is the current state of customer interconnection in Belize, whether this is expected to form part of the portfolio anytime soon, based on conversations there.
Yes, you are right. To address Stephanie's question, we are interested in looking at distributed generation as well as the utility scale solar. the current regulations are not in place with the PUC. So we don't have any regulations in place at this time, but the conversation has started, and I believe drafts are on the way in order to confirm what the regulations would be, what the tariffs would be. But in absence of that and the approval process that is required for that, we are more focused on the utility solar at this point, since we already had an approved project from the RFP 2013, so that we can proceed with that. The distributed generation for solar PV would complement our utility scale solar. So we're interested in both, but we're proceeding with the utility scale solar as a initial step, since we already have approval from that perspective, and then we're working with the PUC in the pipeline of getting the distributed generation online as well.
Thank you very much, Sheena. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we had agreed that the webinar would be, this dialogue would have been until 12:30 p.m. Eastern Caribbean time, which is 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be wrapping up in less than 5 minutes. If you will indulge, we will end up going a few minutes over because we had those technical glitches earlier, which would have affected us. So we will finish in exactly 5 minutes from now, which would be 12:45 p.m. Eastern Caribbean time and 11:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we have another 6 minutes, if you want to call it that we will use. And there are two things which I want to pretty much use the 6 minutes to capture, maybe one set of dynamics. The whole question of electric vehicles and how it is that electric vehicles will be more deeply integrated. And I see a question here which speaks to some of what is emerging in the electric vehicle world with respect to the integration of electric vehicle capacity for storage as part of what we call vehicle to grid integration, not just grid to vehicle. And I would like to explore all the panelists. I would like to get your views. Where do you see the future where electric vehicle is concerned? What is the current state in your countries? Are you already talking about vehicle to grid integrations? Is it just grid to vehicle integration? What are the current state of your plans? I know Lincoln had covered some of this partially in his presentation, but really give us in 2 minutes your view of where exactly electric vehicle currently sits in your system in terms of the conversation, even if it is that it isn't yet built out, and in the future, say 2030, where you expect, based on your own vantage point, that electric vehicle will be from a planning and implementation perspective within your system. So I will start. I will start with since Lincoln had started the ball on that. I will start with Lincoln here again because he had gave us the some initial insights in Jamaica. I will go to Lincoln, then I'll go to Jonathan, and then I'll go to Sheena, and then we will take a wrap and close today. Electric vehicles is interesting and important because, of course, naturally, you have heard some of the news. It's coming whether we want it or not. I would have liked to explore hydrogen, but there's not a lot of time for us to do that today. Tomorrow there will be a session on fuel cells and hydrogen, which will talk about how it is that we can start thinking about hydrogen as a storage option that can circumvent some of the cost and other issues that we are facing with battery storage, lithium-ion battery storage, and other types of storage which are, we are grappling with at this point in time. And of course, thinking about the portability of hydrogen that can help us to shift energy from place to place for both stationary and mobile use, even from island to island, whether it is an option to shift energy around that could, in a sense, eliminate the need for some of the submarine cables. If hydrogen produced, for instance, in Nevis can be put on a barge in ISO type tanks and sent to St. Kitts for power generation there as an example. Not saying that the submarine interconnection isn't feasible, but just throwing things out there that is a part of the conversation that is now happening. Tomorrow you will hear about all of that in the hydrogen dialogue with a number of innovation leaders who will be participating there. But I will ask the electric vehicle question today because that is one that is upon us already. The hydrogen is more further down the line and we have more time to plan that. But the electric vehicle question is one that we have to answer because we are now with the throes of dealing with electric vehicle integration. So again, Linkai, Jonathan, Sheena, and then we'll wrap. Thank you.
All right. So where we are in terms of EVs, so the current project that we are embarking on is to install charging stations right across the island, right, in support of a future infrastructure for EVs for persons either within the transportation sector or the delivery sector or even private users to move from everywhere across the islands. Across the island, that the EV charging stations will be so located that it will facilitate that. It will basically also mean that there will be some dialogue, and Gary mentioned it before, in the IRP, because electric vehicles can be a part of the demand side response mechanism, in that not only do you charge, but can we also have a future business that if, for example, a utility needs some additional support, that customers who have a certain amount of charge in their vehicle and want to provide back to the grid for peaking response or what have you, right? Then vehicles that were charged by the grid can also provide power back to the grid to be used to offset either a high demand situation, fluctuations in other opens from other VRE facilities, right? So these are conversations that we will be having along with the IRP unit once we have actually kicked off that ball and got that to roll. Then the other part will be, if you're gonna have an electric vehicle sector, right, you have to engage dealers, right? So you can't just be putting up infrastructure and you don't have some kind of stimulus so that a dealer can probably have a situation where he, at reduced cost, he can bring these vehicles into the country so that they can compete with the traditional internal combustion engine vehicles. So I know that some discussion will happen at a high level with the government, and I know that the government is very excited about that. And then the last part would be to start some form of pilot, especially on the transportation where buses are concerned. So I remember last year with the minister at that time, we went on a program in the US with the current US ambassador to Jamaica and the ministry to start looking at the potential of bringing buses into the grid, right? Because in Jamaica, the public transportation system is still government owned, right? And one of the possibilities is, yes, you can look on buses that are running on CNG, that's compressed natural gas, but to have electric buses in the fleet, and then the utility would help set up these kind of charging arrangements, charging stations, so that these buses can move from different stations, right? All while driving down the cost of transportation and reducing the need and the dependency on fuel oil that is used in traditional buses. So these are all discussions that have been started. And I know, as Gary said, the work, the actual analysis for that will be done, is going to commence in the coming year. And JPS also has started on a project, and it is approved also by the regulator to ensure that we implement charging stations across the country to support the proliferation of EVs once we go into that as a mainstream energy sector.
One quick question, Linkai, related to that. Did your tariff application include tariff for EV charging?
I'm not the right guy to ask that, I think when we get to that part of the discussion, I know that is something that the regulators will champion, right, to ensure that as best as possible, the right rates are set so that it is attractive for you to go in, right? And basically, it will not also help in driving up the costs on the other side of the business. So I know that between the regulator and the ministry, they will deal with that one.
All right. Well, good stuff. Jonathan.
Yes, that's essentially right now it's at a conversation and consideration level. But one of the things that's happening that we've seen already is the actual providers of vehicles on the island. Some of them are already starting to move towards hybridized fleet that they're bringing in as well. And that's what we're looking at is probably getting a pilot vehicle that we can use to actually model and collect data, so this performance in the island, and then look at mapping out like charging points and developing that going forward.
Okay, thank you. And Sheena, you will get the honor, my dear, of closing us off in terms of your intervention.
Yes, BL is interested in EVs. We're looking to be more than an electricity company, your energy service provider. So we've already started a pilot in line with looking at EVs and their chargers. We have received bids for chargers. We're looking at installing both fast chargers and level 2 chargers. Currently, we have 2 full electric vehicles and 1 hybrid for the company that we're testing out. Based on the geography of Belize, as what Linkoy said, but we have it more complex. The manufacturers are worried about the infrastructure being in place for the long distances of travel. So we're strategically deploying those chargers that will be coming in order to test the distances and have them available so that people can see that the chargers are here and making it more attractive for EVs to start coming in. So we are looking to get 1 or 2 more electric vehicles before the end of the year. Also from the ministry perspective, they're doing a study in line with buses, which should be completed in 2021, a pilot study. They're intending to get 4 buses as well. So we're working closely with them in that study in order to collaborate and ensure that the necessary infrastructures are in place.
Thank you very much, Sheena. And just for the record, CARICOM is working through its institutions and of course the working group which we have established, CCRE being the lead institution, and of course the working group of utilities and governments in the region, including the JPS and BEL, who are members of this working group, to develop an electric vehicle strategy. And we are far away. We already have a framework. The consultants who are working on this, which is CADMOS, have already produced what we could call an outline of what the strategy will entail, and we are now having that under review before the full strategy is detailed. So we expect that by next year there will be an EV strategy to help and to guide and orientate countries' ability. But I would encourage all of you to join the virtual roadshow that we will have on Friday for electric vehicles, and that will speak to a lot of what is happening in the region, including buses. You might have heard the news that Barbados has a fleet of about just over 30 electric buses already operating. We are collecting performance data. We are intending to share this with the countries within the region once we have enough performance data available. So there's a lot for countries like Belize to learn, even from countries like Barbados, which have different topography, of course, naturally, and different size and scales, but the performance data nevertheless is available and can be extrapolated, and we will see what is potentially possible. So ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today. Lots of questions still in the chat, and the question and answer panel. I wish we could have gone through every single one of them, but we will see how best we can provide you with answers over time. Now, the people have been asking about the presentations and the videos. The videos are going to be available typically in the CARICOM Facebook site and the CARILEC YouTube channel. The videos are usually available as podcasts where you can pretty much watch them on your own time. Once we are finished recording, the videos are posted there. The presentations are posted on the CARICOM Energy site. Nadia, I've typed I think in the box already, the energy.caricom.org URL that you can access that site through, but you can get the presentations there. Thank you very much for a very good day. Let me give a virtual round of applause to my panel. Every one of you gave really excellent presentations, detailing much of what has been done, but also articulating much of what remains to be done. The story is one of progress, very good progress, and expectedly much more progress to come. So, ladies and gentlemen, the renewable energy in the Caribbean and the integration of renewable energy in the CARICOM framework is indeed alive and well. We are at about 13.5% aggregatedly now, and we are working to get towards 47% by 2027. And with the work that the countries are doing, as articulated here today, we expect that we should be able to get there. Thank you very much. Do have a good day wherever in the world you are. And I hope to see you tomorrow during the hydrogen discussion and again on Friday during the EV roadshow. Do take care and thank you all.
No problem. Thank you, and thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.